Right. Thank you to Grace. Grace was supposed to be on a flight that would arrive at 2 o'clock, giving us well enough time to get here. However, her flight was delayed by 1.5 hours, and we had 2 minutes to get here. So Grace literally got off the tarmac and has come straight here. Thank you to Ram, battling a bit of asthma. So happy to see all of you here. Welcome. And thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for braving the roads and the rain. Tomorrow is a holiday, so stay up late and enjoy. We're here to launch Suraj's book, Suraj's remarkable new book, Caste Matters. And so, of course, the most important person to welcome is Suraj Yengde. Suraj Yengde has been traveling over the last month. Suraj has somehow visited about 72 cities and done about 7 events a day. I'm only slightly exaggerating, but he literally has done about 10 events in Nanded, and then Aurangabad, and then every other city that you can think of. Somebody asked him whether this was part of his promotional tour, and he said, I don't really think of it as a promotional tour. I'm here to have conversations about my work, and incidentally, about a book that I wrote. But you'll find as Suraj goes along that he's actually not the best at self-promotion. And so in part, it needs others to do it for him. This, of course, is a serious work that needs to be taken seriously. Indeed, much of Suraj's life has been devoted to taking the fact of Dalit oppression seriously. But Caste Matters is also a personal testament. It is a testament to levity, to love, to joy, to all of these facts of Suraj's life and these emotions which Suraj takes just as seriously as his activism. Since it's been a hard week for us, given the news out of Delhi and given the way some of us certainly are feeling, since there's a general air of dejection around us, I thought the best way to preface a serious discussion about a serious book might be to start on a different note. Now, I thought I could do that best by showing you some of Suraj's earlier work. Now, very few people have seen this work. In part, it's because it was only ever printed in South Africa. And now I think the time has come to give it some wider exposition. I believe we have slides somewhere that we can show you. But this is Suraj. This is Suraj, who you'll see very quickly in another avatar. You might not recognize the person that you're looking at there. But in fact, 10 years ago in Johannesburg, Suraj was a photographic model. He collaborated, willingly I should add, and joyfully, in a photonovela that I directed for a wonderful small magazine called Chimurenga, which is normally very high-minded, by the way, but decided to let me do very, very low culture work with them. He plays a gangster's apprentice who finally sees the light. In the course of this novella, Suraj is treated brutally. He's beaten up. I mean, granted, he also tries to strangle people and extort them for money, and is in very good company with a world-famous DJ, which we could see if we had more of the photographs, which we sent ahead in advance. And what you'll see when looking at more of these photographs, which are going to come up shortly, is that a few things have changed since that time. So firstly, Suraj, we shot this on a very low budget, and Suraj had to bring his own clothes, and for some reason decided that the best costume to wear as a gangster's apprentice would be a t-shirt that says, I look like Suraj Yengde, which is what he's wearing. We literally didn't have the time or the money to change it. So that's how he appears in this. He finally gets rescued, but as you can see, he's being beaten up and bloodied. And a lot of things have changed if you look at him. Since that time, 10 years ago in Johannesburg, he's gained a PhD from Wits University, in fact, becoming the first Dalit scholar to earn a PhD from an African university. He's gained a number of awards. He's gained the authorship of a number of books. But most importantly, he's also gained a lot of hair, a lot. And so, Suraj, on behalf of all fashion-conscious people in Bangalore, yes, of which I count us among them, I would like to formally congratulate you, not for the many degrees, the books, the awards, and the fellowships, but for your amazing hair. Thank you. It's the hair we wish we all had, yeah? Tracy. And to properly welcome you to Bangalore, Suraj, I'd like to begin the job of launching this wonderful book by asking you to read right from there for a few minutes from the first chapter. A few of the most powerful excerpts from this book are Suraj's stories of growing up. Welcome to Bangalore, Suraj.
Thank you.
Welcome to you and your hair. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello. Thank you on behalf of me and my hair. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I would just like to, more than formal, an informal acknowledgement of this incredible event. I would really like to thank and acknowledge the work, support, and love of my dear brother Achal. Let's give it up for Achal for his devotion. And whoever is smitten by his love cannot escape, but continue to grow under his love. So I really appreciate you, Achal, for being here and doing this. Incredible Grace Banu, who is actually showing us the light in a darker world that we barely even acknowledge, let alone work with them. And Grace Banu comes with this amazing background that not only teaches us about the issue of caste, but the issue of caste existing within the trans struggle, and I think this is something that is very central to how we look at issues by neutralizing the oppressions that is added with caste. So let's give it up for Grace Banu and her amazing activism. And thank you for showing up because her flight was delayed. And of course, Ramachandra Guha, we have been reading him, and the only reason I have Hindustan Times app on my phone is because I have to read his column. So if not for him, I would not have even bothered to even engage with the Birla group. He's a suture between us and the colonial era Birlas. And let's give it up to Ram Guha for his incredible work. I'll read out what I have been asked to. I call this caste souls, motifs of the 21st century. Taking me into her cushy arms, my paternal grandmother, was reminding me of the importance of my presence in her life. My dearest, Majhabara, you're full of life. You have the best eyes. You have so many qualities that I can barely count them. Her darkened face and frail skin glow in the night. The cheapest light bulb in the market, known as zero power bulb, which truly was a lightless bulb, the only source of light in the room, was switched off. She was consoling me in the room the size of a Toyota minibus that I shared with her, my father, my mother, sister, and brother. I shared the floor space underneath the cot with my sick father and brother. Perpendicular to that cot on nylon mats slept my mother and sister. Running her palm on my face in circles, I started massaging my head. Her soft palm had seen everything. The horrors of untouchability, the traditions of imposed inferiority, and her resolution to labor to build her family's life by working in farms and fields as a landless laborer, a servant at someone's house, or in the mill. She represents the traditions of unknown yet so great people. The people made outcast by the Hindu religious order, deemed despicable, polluted, unworthy of life beings whose mere sight in public would bring a cascade of violence upon the entire community. In India, casteism touches 1.35 billion people. It affects 1 billion people. It affects 800 million people badly. It enslaves the human dignity of 500 million people. It is a measure of destruction, pillage, drudgery, servitude, bondage, unaccounted rape, massacre, arson, incarceration, police brutality, and loss of moral virtuosity for 300 million Indian untouchables. In school, I was humiliated for not paying fees on time. The clerk, Tony, as we would call him, Tony Express, would visit the classroom every quarter and call out my name, asking me to stand up. Once I did, he would read out how many months of fees was pending. The higher the number, the more the embarrassment. My classmates added shame to that embarrassment by quietly staring at me in disgust. This was a regular occurrence. Every time Tony came to class, I wanted to leave the school and join the hustlers in my slum. I wanted to leave school and join the hustlers in my slum. They made money and lived as they wanted without relying on anyone's disrespect to get through the hustle called life. Both my grandmothers, mother and father's side, suffered the intense pain of patriarchy, clubbed with the vicious marks of casteism branded on their resilient skin. Their eyes were as deep as one could imagine, that brought me ashore from uncharted fears. They worked as house servants or cooks in the households of upper caste malaks or malkins, literally translated masters or and mistress. I recall an incident with my maternal grandmother, Sarubai, I call her Mai, who was a maid in the house of a bania. She avoided taking her grandchildren to the work for fear of exposing her pitiful life. One day, as a curious 10-year-old, I insisted and followed her to see where she worked. She was mortified upon learning that I was there, watching her clean a toilet. I suddenly got the urge to pee. Initially, she was hesitant for me to use the facility, but seeing a 10-year-old in pain melted her heart. She did the unthinkable. She allowed me to use the bathroom of the Maliks that was placed outside the luxurious house for the use of visitors. During the course of my less than 40-second stay in the bathroom, I could see my grandmother moving side to side in anxiety, as if to caution me to come out before anyone from the house spotted me. I successfully used the toilet, and my grandma almost pulled me outside so that she could flush away the evidence. As she did this, a woman with an eye of suspicion glanced at me from behind the door of the house. Her face turned red. Her forehead already had a red bindi on it. I was positive she had not seen me exit the bathroom, but she suspected something. Her suspicion turned my grandmother's wrinkled face, where each wrinkle was as fixed and historical as the carved layers of sedimentary rock, revealing only pain and fear. Pale. Mai stood aghast, staring at the woman and then looking away, as if hoping to avoid the abuse she might have to hear. She hoped that she would not be insulted in front of her grandson, who studied at an English medium school, a fact she was very proud of. The inevitable happened. The Malkin cursed my grandma with the kind of contempt one has towards a person who has murdered their family members. I did not understand the nature of the curse word nor their meaning, but as a 10-year-old, I recognized the negativity. The Malkin did not stop there, but also directed her rage towards me. I felt vulnerable and insecure. I crouched, trying to hide my face. This incident brought home to me my beingness as a Dalit. The behavior of this person who yelled nasty and derogatory comments upon the suspicion that a 10-year-old Dalit boy, the grandson of their maid, had used a bathroom on the fringe of their house was unacceptable. I was lesser than the bathroom that was receptacle of shit. I did not know what I was to imagine. Is there a lexicon that gathers the experience of such an unexplainable act? I am yet to find it. It remains the mark tattoo that I carry unwillingly. That is why caste matters.
Searing passages, Suraj. I think, is this working? Yeah. Those are incredibly searing passages, Suraj, and I can only imagine how painful it is for you to read that, given how much it affects us to hear. It's very moving, and your book is full of incredibly moving anecdotes like this. But to go back to where you started this story, and to go back to a large part of this book, especially given how tough these times are, what a difficult week it's been in the history of this nation, I thought that a good way to begin might be to talk about love. You spend a lot of time in your book discussing love. This is a book about the oppression you face, the oppression that continues to face millions of other Dalits like yourself, even to this day. But a large part of this book is about the love that you have, the networks and the community of love that coalesced around you, that sustained you, and indeed actually made you who you are. And so to start, how did your love form at different stages of your life? And why is it so important for all of us to think of what our communities and networks of love are to sustain us through difficult times?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Achal. Um, when we are thinking about caste, we are very much blinded with our insecurities. Because the people who do not want to confront the reality have always found excuses by disparaging the people who are trying to struggle and strive under this casteist, nastist regime. And what has happened is they have equated the people who are fighting against caste to something subhuman or something other. And this other is someone who receives and who deserves to receive contempt and hatred. And this has been a style of casteist regime. In our everyday acts, direct, indirect, we impose casteism of some sort that ensures the person's humanity is withdrawn. And once we do that, then we are open to beat the person the way we want. And that's why we have used various epithets to describe Dalits or describe their life, their survival. So Dalit life, either it's almost in a binary. It either receives contempt or either it receives a charitable sort of affection. In that, the Dalit humanity is lost. And therefore, there is always this patronization of their identity. And I think that can be overlooked and that can be understood if we base ourselves into understanding who are these Dalit people? Like, why are they so resilient in 1,000 years of oppression and still they manage to live a life and dream about something which they don't know what it is going to look like? They're trying to wrestle with modernity. They are trying to hustle with the logos that are trying to offer certain sense of freedom. And for Dalits, every day is a free day because you don't know what's going to happen to you next day. And in this kind of multiple freedoms, Dalits are totally relying on the inheritance they have gotten, and that is the love. It is because Dalits have not lost the capacity to love. And you see, this love is not this romanticized, market-oriented, cheap culture. Love is something that has sustained them. It goes beyond the space and time. It has been in a process. It's a transcendent where you can be a person in certain location and still grasp the conditions of Dalit. And what is it? It is the immense potential of love. The idea of Dalit love that I call it, it's a secularized notion of love. It is not tied to any parochial or primordial notions and not tied to certain values and cultures that are not belonging to them. It is the nakedness where you come as a human and then you deal with other human. With the layering of mythicized identities like the caste and the layers that then we use, which becomes our thick skin, where a normal human dialogue is not possible to penetrate through our hearts and minds. This attitude is actually subverted by looking at the aspects of love. And this is on this foundation I build upon myself. And when I'm trying to think, Dalit love is incredible in the sense where loving someone in the midst of oppression is a courageous act. And engaging with the person on a human basis is rebellious. And when they are encouraging courage and rebel to be a form of their lingua, it is revolutionary. So the Dalits' mere act of loving itself is courageous, rebellious, culminating into a powerful revolution. We have not gotten hold of these totems that these Dalits have been building their foundation upon. And love again is spiritualized, but it's also a felt experience. It is not a romanticized or overly dramatized conception. It is something you live on a day-to-day basis. How do we justify where a landless peasant is actually telling her grandson to believe in tomorrow? And not only believe, but to triumph in this catastrophes that we have. We call multiple catastrophes. There is something very peculiar. And that aspect is that we will ensure that love is your fortification. It's the barriers that people have brought in to us. It's like a barbed wire when person come with a casteist attitude or not. It's very difficult to penetrate. And I think love is that emotion, that sensibility, where we can actually talk about this without even adhering to any other secondary norms. And again, the love is not heteronormative. It is not confined to the binaries. It goes beyond. And I think that's what peculiar is. Because if we look at what the popular culture and otherwise is teaching us, is actually teaching us how not to love. When we see any popular movie, there is always most of the incidents, and there's always the parents of the girl and boy are not agreeing, and that's why they are eloping the house, and there's a whole. That's a caste there. It's an intercaste marriage, but the notion, the reference to caste is hidden, and actually it's suppressed. In this logic, we have actually denounced the immense potential and the existence of Dalit. It's an ontological reality. It is not premised on any made up things. They are building this onto something their ancestors are given. And therefore, in Dalit love, nobody is nobody, yet everybody is everybody. The nobodiness is where you come to the floor as a person who is willing to learn more. And you are everybody because your agency is important. We'd like to retain the agency that you bring to the... And I think this mixed utopia that people have in where they would like to have identities yet cannot have it, I think that's a very complicated space. Dalit love actually ensures the protection of each and other's way of looking at and identifying with each other's. And I think it is primarily coming out of self-love and self-care. Because you can have this capacity to self-love. And it's a powerful emotion, it's a powerful gesture that you not only care for your own people, but you care for others. And the best evidence is that from 2006 to 2016, about 500,000 atrocities were committed against Dalits. It's a genocide that we saw under our eyes. Yet, and this is not a new incident, this has been happening since independence era, prominently with immense amount of brutal massacres. Yet, Dalit have not invoked civil wars. They have every reason to. They have still managed to keep the faith in others' humanity. They are trying to appeal to the consciousness that this is about time. Let's try to reconvene.
Thank you very much, Suraj. That's very powerful. Grace, turning to you. By the way, I think there are more mics, and so I think that there is a mic for each one of you. And also, feel free to interject in any of these conversations. I just have a few questions for each of you based on, I know what you wanted to talk about. Grace, we talked a little bit about your reaction to reading Suraj's book. And I've heard you speak before, very movingly, about the experience of being a young child, a heartbreakingly young child, who had to face two different kinds of oppressions that she didn't understand on the basis of gender identity and on the basis of caste identity, to the extent that there were years when you were only allowed to go to a school after it had closed for ordinary business. From your experience of growing up, how, and your experience in activism now, what parts of Suraj's book particularly resonated with you, and what are the layers that you'd like to add to the experience he describes?
First of all, congratulate our Panther, Suraj Yengde. Saying, I don't have a hard copy of your book. I read the PDF. So immediately, oppressed community, when we get some gift for us, immediately we'll search, okay, anything about us to write or anything. So I immediately went search box, I typed transgender.
Yes.
So it's automatically going page number 54. So I read, Okay, Suraj Yengde, our Panther, covered all the issues, all the oppressed community issues. So, yes, it's happening still now. Within the trans community also,
Can you describe that part that you read in Suraj's book? The incident.
at the
For those who don't know, yeah.
a Dalit and Muslim trans women, they both have the conversation, and that Dalit trans woman said the upper caste, well-known trans activist, they they didn't come to our house, but they said, "Oh, I'm a trans activist." So I faced this kind of oppression lot of times. For example, the famous, well-known activist, she said, trans activist, she said, "You know, Grace, me and your relationship is like a Ram and Sabri relationship."
What?
But she said, "I'm a trans rights activist. We don't have the caste, we don't have the religion, we don't have nothing. This is caste." So when I read that context, immediately that incidents come remind me, okay, we are facing this kind of things. So this is one example, but every day, day to day, every day, I'm facing my caste-based discrimination at the same time gender-based discrimination, because my community, from the trans community, lot of people, they don't know we are oppressed by another caste system, patriarchy system. The cisgender people, they are oppressed to the trans community, but they don't know. We should educate. So when I realize, okay, these people are oppressed my community, so immediately I raise the question. So I read that whole context immediately. It's reminding my school age, as you said, my school age. I don't know what is caste. I don't know what is religion. I don't know nothing. What is society? What is people? So I don't know anything. But this society teach. Uh, okay, this is casteism. This is gender. This is patriarchy. So when I face up discrimination in my school HM said, "You can't come to the school." So immediately my mother, the that liberation come from the women.
Wow.
So my mother, she's a Dalit woman. So she went and she asked to my HM, "Please allow my children to study, continue their study, because education is important for my community." So he said, "Okay, we allow your children, but you should follow some terms of condition." As you said, that 8 o'clock school, I will go to the 8:30, and 4 o'clock that school will close immediately. Sorry, 4:30 that school will close. I left from the school 4 o'clock. So I can't speak with anybody. I can't enter into this classroom. I can't speak with teachers. So in front of the HM room, the HM, he removed his chapel. I sat down on that small space. So that time only I analyze why these people are treating different. So okay, this is casteism. This is this transphobic thing. So immediately, as he said, immediately that I raised my voice. But on that age, I don't know anything.
How old were you then?
It's 11th standard, something. I don't know anything. Because at that age, I don't know why my body behavior like a woman. I want to change my gender. So I don't know. So I have some trauma. Immediately this society push all the situation. They said, okay, they educate, this is casteism, this is patriarchy, and this is this how the society will treat you. So they are all separated me. So at that time, I got that depression. But because I don't know why these people are treating like. So, okay, I will explain to my family, but my family also, they doesn't know about trans identity, and they don't know anything. They are thinking, okay, my children study well. They are like, okay, I'm a male, but all the parents have some hope, male children.
Yeah.
So they have lot of hope, but they didn't understand my feeling. So immediately I left from the home. So after that only, why these people are treating my community. And after that only I realized, okay, these people said, this HM said, why you should go sit in the floor. So that time only I analyzed, okay, this is casteism. So after that I faced, I read lot of Baba Sahib Ambedkar books and the Periyar books, Lenin, Marx. Okay, I want to change my community to as usual life, begging and the sex work these people are doing. But I want to change my community. So that's why I raise, we want reservational rights in education and employment. So still now this fight is going on, but when I raise reservation rights, immediately these people identify my caste. So she's coming from Dalit community. In trans community also, a lot of people said, within our community we don't have anything. But why Grace said reservation? So reservation is a Dalit community recommendation. Dalit community rights. So she's look like a casteist. So my community, they are thinking I'm a casteist. But I'm proudly said that is my rights. I want to get my right.
It's an incredibly inspiring story. But it doesn't stop there, of course. You became the first trans person to be admitted into an engineering college in Tamil Nadu and received your degree. And it wasn't without a fight. You had to fight your barge your way to Anna University to get your engineering degree. It's fantastic. On top of that, it's really amazing. I think all of us felt 5 feet smaller after hearing you. But, oh, sorry, please. Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead, Ram.
So, listening to Suraj and Grace, it struck me that I was born with 5 kinds of privilege. So I'm a Hindu in a Hindu majority country. I was born a Hindu in a Hindu majority country, a Brahmin, a male, a heterosexual, and an English speaker.
Yeah.
All right. Now, just the first.
And you have a Hindustan Times column.
I'll come to that. But let me knock that out first. I'll come to that. Thank you for that. Because Suraj, take out your phone, uninstall the Hindustan Times app. And I'll explain to you why. The column that you read in English in the Hindustan Times the same column comes in your mother tongue Marathi in a journal called Sadhana, started by socialists, started by what you would call Brahmins against Brahminism. founded by Sane Guruji, later edited by the great martyr Narendra Dabholkar. So uninstall Hindustan Times and read my column in Sadhana. And also subscribe to it, because they need money. Hindustan Times doesn't need money. All right.
Good
Thank
news.
you very much. All right. So,
Alert all Marathi.
but let me just talk about these 5 kinds of privilege. I mean, just listening to them clarified in my mind, reading his book and listening to this, clarified in my mind these 5 forms of privilege. Now, at how I'm now 61, I'm the oldest person. I'm the most privileged person in this room and also the oldest person, which means I have the most experience, life's experience of living with the privilege, enforcing it, benefiting from it, also sometimes battling with it, trying to fight it. You know, I have tried to fight it with spectacular degrees of unsuccess. But as a sociologist, firstly, I grew up in a completely secular home. I mean, it was unbelievably secular home for a Hindu Brahmin home. We had a Muslim cook, and there were no caste restrictions of any kind. Right? I mean, my great uncle Gopal Swami Iyer, who was one of the pioneers, was one of the first Brahmins against Brahminism in Mysore state. I mean, he was, among other things, had a role to play in the first reservation. Anyway, but I was male privilege. I took absolutely for granted. Heterosexual privilege I took absolutely for granted, and English language privilege also I took absolutely for granted. So in the course of 60 years of battling all of this and listening to the two of you, I think I'd probably, had I not had a daughter, if I'd had 2 sons, I think I'd have been 50 times more patriarchal than I am, and that's quite a lot already right now. So I think what I would like to say, just reflecting on this, I think if those of us who want to become more human, more humane, want to battle the different kinds of privilege we have. I mean, maybe Grace has the least privilege on this panel, because Menaka studied in English, I'm sure, all through, right? And Suraj is a male, right? Now, I think to battle this kind of privilege, we need books like Suraj's, life testimonies like Grace's, legal battles like Menaka's. I mean, so, Achal, congratulations on the kind of panel you've assembled, because, I mean, we need this kind of understanding and to broaden our mind and battle our privilege. And let's take our last point. I'm also privileged in a 6th sense. I was born with a 6th kind of privilege, and I don't want to apologize for that. I am a South Indian.
We consider Maharashtra is considered South. We consider Maharashtrians. You're one of us, so it's fine. Menaka, go ahead.
It struck me since you started, you started this conversation with hair.
Yeah.
It occurred to me that, Achal, you and I have the least amount of hair on this panel.
Or the best fashion sense.
Yeah, on the back.
Mine is all gone.
It's looking good,
Still
Ram,
more
I
than
must say.
ours.
It's looking like, so in my life as a litigator and as someone who also thinks about the Constitution, I'm always struck by the 2 conceptions of our country that exist, and that is brought home to bear, especially when we hear Suraj speak or Grace speak, which is one, which is this Constitution's country and the Constitution's India. And it's a glorious, brave, bold constitutional choice, right? To make an effort at reparations. Reparations for, historical discrimination based on caste. And it is an extraordinary choice to have that kind of constitutionalism, because it is unusual. Suraj, you're in Boston. American constitutionalism makes no effort at even engaging a conversation of reparations. American politics, mainstream politicians don't go there. So on the one hand, you have this kind of thoughtful, necessary constitutional strain, which speaks to reparations. We see that in the kind of intricate arrangements, formulas, and numbers that judges, adjudicators will go into, when adjudicating, when thinking about reservation. And so you have that kind of constitutionally envisaged country that tries to make amends. And then you have the reality that is India, right? Which is violent, thoughtless, still privileged, and still privileging traditional privilege, right? And I guess the question really is certainly, my life experience is limited as a lawyer. And being a lawyer, in fact, is a very strange life choice. There are, in my mind, there are three kinds of sexualities, and I say this all the time: gay, straight, and advocate. Because really, as an advocate, one, you spend a lot of time, and, represented Ram as well, you're really sort of pounding the hours, right? And then you have the week that we've had,
Yes.
right? This week in India today, which really, this is a week where you have had molecular change in India. There's just been a very intricate, definitive kind of change that has been introduced, right? And you have that kind of intricate molecular change being introduced, and yet you have this kind of old India continuing at the same time, which refuses to let the constitution's India penetrate it, despite 70 years. And certainly there have been some successes, but overwhelmingly we realize that the lived reality of what should have been success stories is far from it, is far from Ambedkar's India. It is far from the constitution's India. And so on top of that, now you add this kind of molecular essential change, which is not just happening this week, but we will inevitably face, be part of, witness, and be defined by, certainly over the next many generations. So not just has the constitution's India and Ambedkar's India been stretched and fought and battled and often frustrated, but now you have a third new India being made. And I guess the question really is that of our disparate experiences, some common, some specific to each of us, how do we make sense today of these three Indias that are, in our consciousness, in this conversation? I'm sure it's something that many of you think about or are thinking about, or I hope you're thinking about. Because I have learned one thing, I think, having been a lawyer now for 22 years. I have learned that the court battle is important, but it's only a very small part of enduring change. That if you look at the stories of the constitution's India, it is an expectation that there will be wins, but there will be losses. How do we hold the line on our wins? How do we hold the line in today's India on the constitution's India, on Ambedkar's aspirations? How do we hold the line on not falling back in terms of what your lives have witnessed? And what do we do in India now, after having had this part of the week that we have? What do we make sense of our constitutional aspirations and our individual aspirations, and the aspirations clearly of a distinct minority that is now intended to be left behind? What are the coalitions that we now build, and what are the coalitions that we now form?
Well, Ram, I know that you've been as equally incensed as the rest of us about the events of the last week. And I know that in that, and in reaction to Suraj's book, we were talking about the idea of India as a sort of piece of jazz music or as a jazz band, and that there are various kinds of flattenings, each more insidious and threatening than the next. And in some sense, the love, the identity, and the networks that Suraj writes about in Caste Matters are very strongly based upon the idea that there is a viable Dalit identity ahead. And based on the current week's events, based on our political past over the last few years, since you've been thinking about this a lot, how do you see this move forward, both in terms of the future of what Dalit identity looks like, but also how other of the many, many, many marginalized groups and threatened groups that exist in the country today, how people we actually hear of even less about or from, whose issues actually don't seem to matter in any sense to the country at all, like Adivasis, for instance, where does that go?
So, I mean, I'll answer that also and try and take account of Menaka's very important intervention. You know, I mean, so the different aspects of Suraj's book, and one of them is also a sense of mischief and play. And there's a very nice section on Dalit satire and humor. Yeah. And some of that mischief and play is in his own prose. And there's this lovely analogy, I don't have the book with me, where you say that the nation is like a jazz band. It's still coming together. It's, you know, it's kind of assembling each other and, you know, it's still finding its way and still finding out who the other guys are in the band and so on. It's a beautiful image. But Suraj's book was written probably a year or a year and a half ago. And in the last year, you know, one instrument in that jazz band is playing more loudly. It's not the clarinet, it's not the piano, it's not the horn, it's not the trumpet, it's the drum. And it's drumming louder and louder and louder and louder and louder. Now, it's the drum of Hindu majoritarianism, which is drowning out everything else. And not just last week, but what we've been seeing for some years. And just listening, I mean, it's interesting to think of, you know, I have a slightly lay interest in music. I think Achal's is stronger than mine, and I'm sure those of you are even stronger. But it strikes me that, you know, they're great Mridangam players from Tamil Nadu. They're great tabla players from Maharashtra, from Punjab, the Punjab school of tabla playing and so on. But I haven't heard of great percussion players from Gujarat till maybe yesterday or day before. I may be wrong. I stand open to correction. Maybe some Gujarati in this room will correct me. But the subtleties of, you know, Palghat Mani Iyer or Ustad Allah Raka Khan are not what we're talking about when we talk about the drum in this particular jazz band. So I think that's like, you know, the second point, picking up from Suraj's book, linking it to Menaka's intervention and of course her own experience, and also the issue of broadening the scope of reservation which Grace raised. One of the interesting and important aspects of Suraj's book is it does not see Ambedkar as a Dalit thinker and constitutionalist alone. You know, Ambedkar has been ghettoized. Similar to, in some ways, the way Tagore has been reduced to being a Bengali poet, for which the Bengalis are responsible. They've not let the rest of us see Tagore's greatness. And unfortunately, some Dalit intellectuals focus too much on Ambedkar as a Dalit actor, which he was, of course, and they do not let us see the other aspects of Ambedkar's greatness. You know, as an economist, as a legal scholar, as a constitutionalist, as a sociologist, as a moralist, as a federalist. And I think that needs to be deepened much more. I mean, Suraj's book opens it up, but it needs to be developed really much, much more. You know, the different aspects of Ambedkar's thought. I just say two things. One, historical fact, because I think this needs to be brought to the attention of many people, left-wing people in this, and even, you know, not just Dalits, but left-wing, you know, critics of Hindu patriarchy. You know, it is commonly believed that Ambedkar left the cabinet because of the Hindu Code Bill. And, but please read his resignation letter. It is not only about Hindu Code Bill. He says, I have a PhD in economics, but I am not in the planning committee of the cabinet. I am a, you know, expert on federalism. I have a doctorate in law, but I'm not in the federalism committee. You know, Nehru kept him out of everything, right? So if you read that letter, you get a sense of Ambedkar's own self-respect. He does not want to be seen merely as a guy reforming these laws, right? And he was much more than that. And, you know, if you look at what's happening today, again, I urge all of you, every single person in this room who has not seen or read it, please read Ambedkar's last speech to the Constituent Assembly. I think it is 25th November 1949, but I may have the date wrong. But please go and read it. He makes 3 points there, which are profoundly relevant to India today, to every society in the world. First, he says that with this constitution, we'll be entering the regime of one man, one vote. We should say one person, one vote, But he says one man, one vote, because Ambedkar also was burdened with a certain kind of patriarchy in his language. But when will we have one person, one value? Now, I think that is something. We have one man, one person, one vote. We have free elections. But in between elections, every day, the kind of disjunction between constitutional values and everyday life that Menaka pointed out continue. So that's the first warning. The second warning, he says, which I have less sympathy with, where he says Satyagraha is the grammar of anarchy. And we should have only constitutional means. But the third warning is the most important. The third warning is the most important in today, and for India today, where he says, Bhakti in religion is a route to the salvation of the soul. Bhakti in politics is the route to dictatorship. However much a man has done for his country, do not lay down your liberties at his feet. I mean, the cult of Narendra Modi and the colossal cost it will impose on our society, on our polity, on our nation, on our civilization, were anticipated by Ambedkar in that last speech. Do not lay your liberties at the feet of a person. Now, it's interesting. Firstly, who did Ambedkar have in mind? He may have had Gandhi in mind, because there was a cult of Gandhi then, right? Yeah. It so turned out that he anticipated Indira Gandhi, because the cult of Indira Gandhi led to the emergency. So I think, just to see the last point, I mean, I think it's very important to look at the issue that Menaka pointed out, the disjunction between constitutional values, which have to be refined and improved, and everyday life, and how someone like Ambedkar really provides us a template, not just a Dalit template, but a moral, philosophical, intellectual, sociological template for thinking about how to redeem those constitutional values in practice.
There's a wonderful piece, Ram. Thank you for that. That Upendra Bakshi wrote some years ago, and I've tried to compare it to your Ambedkar's, and I can't quite decide if he got all. But he wrote this piece about identifying 7 different Ambedkars, and he described them as the authentic Dalit, the scholar, the activist journalist, the pre-Gandhian activist, because Ambedkar's activism in India precedes, the Gandhian antagonist, the constitutionalist, and the renouncer of Hinduism, in getting us to examine the paucity of ways by which we revere or imagine Ambedkar in the life of this nation. And I know that, Menaka, you have consistently used Ambedkar in your work, in litigation. He's actually a very useful professional tool, and has been enlightening in somewhat unexpected ways, in the sense of looking at all of the contributions of the founders of this country, or the nation makers in the 1950s. In some ways, you found that Ambedkar has the longest reach and among the furthest sighted thinkers of that time. And could you tell us how?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Both in the context of course, the Section 377 case, for which belatedly congratulations again, as well as all the other cases that you fought at the Supreme Court.
No, and I think that, the feature for me that sets Ambedkar as a thinker apart from anyone else in the Constituent Assembly is that as a political theorist and as a constitutional theorist, his interventions are in many ways timeless. For constitutional scholarship, original intent of founders becomes quite important. In America, originalism has meant, conservatism, parochialism, segregationism, to put it mildly. Keep the rifle, bear arms, right? In India, original intent has been very interesting because, I have used Ambedkar on federalism when speaking to Constituent Assembly members in Nepal when they were writing their constitution. I have used Ambedkar speaking about the concurrent jurisdictions of civilian and military courts when arguing extrajudicial killings by security personnel. We have all used Ambedkar on constitutional morality, from cases like 377 to the right to education, which is our great desegregation attempt. I have used Ambedkar on a conversation that I was having just before I came in on how, this week can be understood in so many different ways. This week can be understood as a nation, maybe voluntarily, involuntarily, knowingly or unknowingly redefining itself in some very essential ways. Or this week can be understood as just a week where you do legal analysis of whether a certain move is constitutional or unconstitutional or legal or illegal. And ironically, it is in the Constituent Assembly, when confronted with the boycott by the Muslim League of the Constituent Assembly, where everyone else is trying to answer this question of, well, is the constitution we make, is it going to be legal or illegal? Will it be binding or non-binding? It is Ambedkar who responds by saying that some questions, Mr. Chairman, sir, some questions are far too important to be just described as legal or illegal. And I think that that is something that we have to grasp, that sometimes certain questions and certain moments that face a nation are far too important to be just defined as constitutional or unconstitutional, because that is only a matter of interpretation. Some questions are so essential that they, in fact, will change the way that we relate to each other. And that is not just about constitutionality. That is something far greater than the legal or the illegal. And I think that, it is that kind of, I think, wisdom that is both political wisdom, but that is also a fraternal wisdom that I think Ambedkar teaches me as a constitutional scholar, as a political theorist, and a man who lived a life that was defined by discrimination, and that he chose to turn it into a life where he would be that timeless champion of not just reparations, but a timeless champion of teaching us to be more thoughtful about our fraternity and our fraternal values. That is our country. And that is what we have this week. That is exactly what we have this week. To my comrades out there who will see this week as illegal or legal, constitutional or unconstitutional, I think Ambedkar would say to them, my friends, my countrymen and countrywomen, this is far too essential and far too important to just be that. So that is Ambedkar to me.
Thank you. Grace, I wanted to bring you in on this. Listening to Menaka very powerfully describe much of what's been going on, listening to Ram's passion about the events of Kashmir, I thought there was also something else that happened this week. The trans bill was tabled in the Lok Sabha. And it's a bill that you have fought against in all of its various forms over the last 4 years. And you've done so with, I would say, conservatively, what, 100th or 1/200th of the incredibly welcome publicity that perhaps reflected a societal change in the way both proprietors and makers of media, as well as its receivers, thought about LGBTIQ issues previously. That hasn't actually filtered down in any tangible way to bring attention to this very, very important piece of flawed legislation that is about to become the law in a way that materially affects you. How, in your own work and in your head, do you not only grapple with the patently unfair and unequal treatment that comes to trans issues in India, but also the unfairness of having to talk about the injustices of a trans bill at a time when a state of 12 million people have been taken over and turned into a prison?
Yes, we as a trans people, we don't have any privilege. So people who have the privilege, they are only occupy the mainstream space. So we are fighting to get that space. We are fighting within our community. We are fighting this patriarchal society, and we are fighting with we are facing discrimination from the women also. So cis women, from the cis women. So in this fight, this is not a trans bill, how do I say? trans will get to visible to all the people. But I said, this is fight. We have the responsibility to educate those people. See, we have the trans bill. This bill have this kind of. It's totally, we are from the beginning onwards, we are opposing the trans bill.
Of course.
That's it. So why these people are opposing? Nobody can't react because they don't want to interest to concentrate this trans community people. You know, from 2000, this bill introduced in 2015. So from 2015 onwards, I think you are seeing a lot of protests happen in Bangalore also. A lot of protests
Absolutely.
happened.
Yes.
But how many people are participating in that protest?
And can you tell us also, for those of us here in the audience who might not have followed it as closely, what are some of the main provisions that you object to, and what will their effects be?
So if the past bill doesn't have the transgender clear definition. That past bill said transgender means partially male nor partially female, wholly male nor wholly female. So this is totally that Hindu Ardhanariswarar God definition. So that's why I said we are not Ardhanariswarar, we are human.
Thank you. Yeah, of course.
So after this fight, we went we met a lot of MPs and we educate those MPs. You know, 2015 we met the Parliament Standing Committee. That Parliament Standing Committee MPs, they didn't know about anything trans people. Nothing. So we presented in front of those people. After finish the presentation, one MP asked, he said, okay, you said you are a trans. Are you have the penis?
So sorry.
Yes. Immediately, I said, okay, these people are like this only. This is society. This is society. So, but after 5 years, last year, Parliament session, lot of MPs raised lot of good amendments. They are aware about the trans people. Now,
Suraj, you have
Supriya
a mic as well.
Sule,
You have a mic as well.
Supriya Sule, and Sasi Tharoor, and Derek Obrey, and Tiruchi Shiva. Yeah. So, lot of MPs raised the voice to support the trans community. But no one in the ruling party. No.
Grace is hurt that you would
Again
make
and
that
again,
accusation.
they are thinking, okay, these people are Ardhanariswarar. We should treat as a god. That's it. We don't give any rights to these people.
They already have divine rights.
So that transgender definition, it's totally against the NALSA versus Union of India judgment. See, that judgment said self-identification.
Of course.
But this is totally against the NALSA judgment. So after that, the begging, they said begging is criminalized.
Right.
Begging is criminalized. And the one trans women, they can't accept the newly trans women, newly trans people, like young trans people, because we know the community family structure. So they are planning to.
Wow.
So if you want to leave from your home, you can go to the court. The court will direct you can go, you will go to the biological family or rehabilitation center.
Amazing.
You know, rehabilitation center, how they will treat and how it's working. So every year we are conducting Trans Day of Remembrance, November 20th, because lot of trans people are killed by the cisgender society, and lot of people committed suicide. So we are remembering those trans people. But last 10 years, we have the ratio, lot of trans people committed suicide. They are all youngsters within the 25 years. So when this bill passed in Rajya Sabha, or it will come to the act, definitely lot of trans people will commit suicide. Definitely they will commit. Or the family discrimination. So this is favor to family and the society. And third, okay, you're saying begging is a criminal. What is the solution? You are planning to rehabilitate my community, but you should give other solution to those community. So we are asking the reservational rights in education and employment. But these people gave unnecessary reservational rights to some people.
Expand upon that. Sorry.
Means
what?
10,
Yeah.
Okay,
I understand.
Upper caste 10% is
yes.
reservation.
Right. No, the 10%.
Yeah, because see, you are saying I'm a beggar, I'm a sex worker. Whatever I'm doing, I'm paying the tax. Till now, I'm paying the tax. Even by the lipstick or biscuits, whatever.
By living.
I'm paying all the tax. But what this society and this government doing to my community? So reservation is my basic rights. So why they can't give? So this all drawback is there in the bill. They said that newly bill they removed self-identification. We accept self-identification, and they removed screening committee. Screening committee have lot of more than 5 doctors in front of those 5 cisgender doctors. We are showing our whole body. So I don't know, lot of people identify as a male or female. You people are doing this kind of, you people are attending this kind of screening committee?
No, of course. Yeah. No,
Huh?
of course not. None of you have been
You are
verified
attending?
to be a male.
No. Then why, who give the rights to see
Verify
my
you,
body?
yeah.
It's totally against Privacy Act, I think. So they said, okay, we are removing that screening committee word. They said, but in the whole bill, please read broadly all the context. They have previous bill the same. They removed only the begging word and the screening committee word. Other than the whole context is there. That begging criminalized, but they remove that beg word only.
Yeah.
So that's why I said this bill passed in Lok Sabha. This day is Gender Justice Murder Day in our trans history in India.
Yeah.
So yes, that's why we opposing this bill. But we are a small group, but our voice is loudly.
Yeah.
So we are loudly say nobody can support our cause, even within our queer community.
Yeah.
Within our queer community also, we did lot of protests, but very few community people, queer community people, only participate in that protest. So this how this society treated my community.
Did you want to add to that, Menaka? Did you want to respond anyway?
I think Grace has said everything that needs to be said. And it's also a question of, look at the timing of the bill. And now ACT, right, about to be notified as acts. Two important pieces of legislation were also passed on the same day that, Article 370 was discussed. One was the trans bill, which will be notified soon, and the other was a commercial surrogacy.
Yes.
And why that is important is because there is a conception of the family in that bill. The family being a man and a woman who've been married for at least 5 years. And it excludes every other category of, partners or citizen in this country, every other category. So both these pieces of legislation, which now have to be notified, both these pieces of legislation, along with a host of other legislation, were passed on the day. Neither of these two or the other legislation that were passed have been actively debated. They were rushed through, in contravention of, the essential values of why you have a parliament. But also, as Grace said, they're not being discussed in the media. They're not being written about. But I hope they'll be challenged. And then it just kind of takes us back to what you were saying, which is that you had this wonderful judgment of Nalsa in 2014. And then you have this, right? And you have this. And it goes to this point that, how do we hold the line? How do we defend the little that has been won? And what do we do with that? How do we go from self-definition to a screening process? And if this is happening in such important avenues, like the one that Grace spoke about, what is going to happen in many other avenues? And
Where
what
we're
do
paying
we
even
do?
less attention.
Where we pay even less attention, right? Where we pay even less attention. How are we, and this is really, to my mind, the big sort of takeaway. What do we do and how do we hold the line?
Grace, you want to? Yeah. No, it's working. Yeah. It's not?
It's okay?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
No. So I want to add two things. So one is, lot of people are saying trans people is a third gender. I don't agree that third gender category. So if you say I'm a third gender, I will raise the question, who is first gender? Who is the second gender? Are you have any constitutional definition?
Excellent. Excellent.
I'm not a third gender. And second is, as you said, Nalsa judgment is it's a landmark judgment. But from minority community, I said the Nalsa judgment have some complication. That reservational base, Nalsa judgment said trans people are considered as a backward class, so socially, economically backward. So, and that word in Tamil Nadu, we are considered as a MBC category,
As in
most backward
MBC.
class.
Yeah, yeah.
So, in all over India, we are considered as a OBC category. So, it's not a social justice. I'm a Dalit, I'm a Adivasi, I'm a Muslim. How do I access the MBC category or OBC category reservation? So this is unclear statement in the Nalsa judgment.
Suraj, just in the interest of time, I wanted to pose a final question to you. That is, how will you solve all our problems, firstly? But the second question is, you're strident in this book. You're strident right through this book. It's not merely personal testimony. It's not just a recounting of horrors and a recounting of loves and the joy and the levity of your childhood growing up in Nanded. Your incredibly loving family, your father who waited outside government offices for days in order to get you the scholarship that you needed to join the Comoros at Harvard, which you so lovingly recounted just before his death. It's not merely a catalogue of the ills of the oppression, but there is a large part of this book that's devoted to a call for action. You work with numerous statistics that outline just how deep the problem of landlessness is within the Dalit community especially, given especially the fact that the Dalit community is employed on the land, which makes the irony much more bitter. And it reminded me a little bit about this lovely book, D.R. Nagaraj's The Flaming Feet, where he wrote about the different ways in which a form of reparations could take place. And I think he calls it land and value, but he was talking about the material kinds of reparations and also the emotional kinds of reparations. And he talked about events where, for instance, people had to drink out of each other's hands, regardless of caste, in small towns and villages, which many people, left and right and of all kinds of, on different spaces in the political spectrum, derided as being cheap and hokey. But to him, brought a tear to his eye because it represented something that was about love, that was about real, that was about something that even 50 years of laws, even if well-designed, well-implemented, and fully workable, would not necessarily be able to undo in terms of the emotional damage of 5,000 years of conditioning and thinking. But having said that, you place a lot of importance on the emotional work of being Dalit. And you also place a lot of importance on the material circumstances of being Dalit, which are, of course, inextricably linked to the emotional state of being Dalit today. I was reminded of this article that got a lot of press, maybe too much press in the United States, Ta-Nehisi Coates' article on a call for reparations. And what he was talking about there in the context of African Americans and the United States was not reparations for slavery, which people can conveniently say was 300 years ago. My father had nothing to do with that. But the consequences of every single thing that the United States did to African Americans between the time of supposed emancipation and the passage of the Civil Rights Bill, and sometimes after, like even yesterday, in terms of how the legislation in the last 150 years or more has actively worked to disenfranchise African Americans and place them into servitude, thereby constituting a debt that needs to be repaid. There is a very active movement, as you know, we know each other from South Africa, and as you know, the Landless People's Movement, a new full political party called the Economic Freedom Fighters in South Africa, works on issues of redistributive justice. The cabinet of South Africa is considering land redistribution for the very first time in any serious sense in about 20 years as a means of reparation, by no means a full reparation, but as one part of it. And yet there hasn't been necessarily, none that I have seen at least, a call for reparations in this country where 90% of the people in this room, including me, have benefited from Dalit oppression and poverty. This is a fact, no? So it's interesting though also from the perspective of what reparations constitute. People think of reparations as, oh, I'll have to give 100 rupees to someone. But the idea that affirmative action is a part of a reparations, that assured and reserved seats, whether in universities or at government jobs, are a part of reparations. Owning land, having a tangible asset base from which you can make intergenerational wealth is a part of reparations. You hinted it, and you do mention it. What in your view is the possibility of even making a demand for reparations, regardless of where it goes, and what is its value?
Thank you for the question, Achal. See, these casteist thugs who continue to inflict violence upon them, they are always on offensive, right? Now, we want to be on offensive. And when we say offensive, it's not to be violent offensive, but we need to make you feel defensive in the sense that the kind of pleasures as well as the benefits that the dominant caste, I call them oppressor castes, enjoy in the society, is to make Dalits feel subhuman, and as well as they make them feel vulnerable. And when you make them feel vulnerable, you corner them and then just square them and fix the issue. Reparation is one dialogue, and that's why one of my critique is the constitutionality doesn't properly engage with reparations. That needs to be accounted for. And because people are unable to grasp the condition of Dalit lives in every day, what they do is they overlook all of this existential metaphors that Dalits are struggling against. And it's a huge wall. Reparations is one way to tell the oppressor that you're also responsible. Now, if you continue to inflict harm, there'll be more reparations on your side. And it's not this only material gain. It's mere acknowledgement to begin with first, that yes, we have benefited out of the murders and rapes of Dalit and continue to benefit even today. And once there is an acknowledgement, let's have a moral call. Let's have a conversation around this. Because reparations goes beyond history. It engages with current lived reality and try to take us to a certain future where we would like to see each other as equals. Now, people, for example, reservations is also inadequate because it's it's actually talking about reserved seats for Dalits or Adivasis or OBCs only. But it doesn't talk about the overrepresentation of certain class and certain caste groups. Now, we had recently of the minister, the secretaries, let's talk about bureaucrats, of the 89, there was only one Adivasi. Right? So the Brahmins, a singular caste, continue to dominate various spheres. Even in the whatever you call the neoliberal capital extension, 44% of the CEOs in various companies sitting in board members are Brahmins. We need to question this about how come a minority exerts so much of influence and power. And we need to put that into account. Why is it singularly that Brahmins continue to be the temple priests across? The rich temples, sitting on so much amount of exploited wealth. Fule talks about the working class, the peasants' wealth that they're sitting upon. There is no dialogue on democratizing that aspect of space. What happens is they just put that we gave you seats. And even there is a whole lot of opposition. Some of these miscreants like Kejriwal and all come out of that movement, who were actually fighting against the constitutional values that was given, who started Youth for Equality and whatnot, the kind of fringe groups. This is the kind of political space we have provided, and by doing that we have made ourselves so insecure that we are thinking about the other person raising a question as an affront, as a challenge. What I am trying to do is I'm trying to connect. Even in the Caribbean countries, they have a reparation council where the countries of the Caribbean they meet and they are discussing with their former colonies about Now Shashi Tharoor talks about the wealth about reparation from the British. What's up, dude? You've been oppressing us, bro. How bland can you be, man? And this is the privileges of the Nayars and the dominant caste and this is a very filthy irony that they present themselves as victims. They benefited out of colonial empire. They had part and parcel of the colonial regime. The most oppressed world continued to oppress. Dalits they were indentured, were somewhere thrown as slaves and continued to be the subjects. The situation of social structure did not change. But these people like these, who continue to parade themselves as liberals, are so blindfolded by their own caste privilege that they cannot engage with this question, And it's frustrating at times, not for us, but for people who are liberals on their side, that this dude is, again, not him, but, I'm talking about an ideology that kind of supports and nurtures that. And again, our liberalism is very much limited to comforting our own desires. What I mean by that is that I feel about this person in a very, affirmative action way, but it's not going beyond that. What my immediate need that I think is, we really need to, democratize our economy. Dalits need land. It's very fundamental to their existence. And I've given all the statistics, even Hindustan column, my column came in that, and where I talked about the 70 percentage, it's a statistics of the people who are working on the field, who are Dalits, are landless. And if you consider major states, and again, farmer is actually it's making caste neutral category. There is no such thing as such. Farmers have a caste, and when we think about farmers, let's also think about those agricultural laborers who have been toiling on that line like bondage laborer for centuries. 90% in major states of Dalits who are working on farms are landless. And their landlessness becomes this, it gives the premium to the oppressor castes who are even the feudal setup, the OBCs and above, to inflict violence because they are the subjects. And reparation, that's why, has to be a transnational dialogue. It is to tell the world that this has been affecting us. Nobody, let alone, all these dominant caste bureaucrats here and even in foreign services, don't even bother to engage with this question. Don't even let the government talk about it. Now, when these various countries meet and various movements are meeting, especially in African American context, this is happening. There is no Dalit there, and this is a responsibility on all of us because we know those spaces. Why don't we encourage more Dalit voices to be gone there? I mean, Dalits might not know, for example, but we know about it, right? So why don't we create more spaces for Dalits to be there and for them to be part of that dialogue? Because it is not about taking away from someone only, but it is about establishing a common citizenship, and it is acceptance that a history has been unfair to you. Present continues to inflict the same historical atrocities, but now we are willing to at least engage with you. This courage is not there among dominant caste people. These are these are people who don't have morality, and the valor that they talk about is actually sitting on the shoulders of especially RSS and all organizations. They're food soldiers are Dalit, Adivasi and OBCs. They use, because I call them darpok, because these people don't have even the courage to face and to engage on a serious note, because they will always use this euphemistic walls to hide and then parade a certain agenda. And that Hindu majorities, again, I don't think it is Hindu, it's a Brahminical supremacy that they are trying to establish. And Hindu again neutralizes the whole notion. Who is Hindu? I mean, Dalits are not Hindus. I mean, according to, even if you look at anthropologically, they are outside the temples. But what they are doing is this specific elan of Brahmins who dominate RSS, by the way, not of the 550 Brahmin subcastes, many are not there. The few privileged caste among the Brahmins continue to do that. So the question remains, what about the other lower caste Brahmins among the Brahmins? They need to also, that's why I talk about the Brahmins needs to fight against Brahminism. Because you guys are also oppressed in certain way, because there are hierarchies operating under it, and there are no equal distribution of resources. So when a Brahmin kid feels he or she is being deprived of any opportunity, it is because your fellow Brahmins are taking your seats. It's not Dalits or Adivasi who are taking your seats. I think that needs to be we need to look inwards for that kind of solutions, because that is what it is. When we talk about IIM professors, for example, about 512 faculties of IIMs, I think there is 2 Dalits across the country. How do you face this reality? And then, of course, you can go to IISc here. These are all Agraharas, where a Brahmin professor nurtures another Brahmin pupil. It's almost like the Dronacharya story. And if any Arjun comes, they will make sure that, any Eklavya comes, and they will make sure they will Eklavyize every other, student. And this is what is happening. We are seeing these repeated incidents, and still yet, our conscious minds are not going step forward. So, as Ram was saying, the privileges we have, we should be open about it. Yes, these are my privileges, and I will make sure I will utilize my privilege so that my privileges will be utilized for your freedom. And when I'm participating in your freedom, I'm primarily making myself free. This is not an act of giving, and when I say, when you are giving something, especially in the anti-caste movement, you are living up to your full potential. Right now, people are not having inadequate confidence to have Dalits in their boardrooms. into their editorial boards. Now, we all saw recently, again, a statistics was out, News Laundry and Oxfam did, about media representation of various castes in the editorial managerial posts. In Hindi channels, all these buffoons who come and talk to us in a very Hinduized language, 100% of the TV anchors in Hindi are upper caste. There is no OBC, there is no SC, ST. English language, 90%. How do we account to that? And so the dominant spaces which educate, I think I say miseducate because they don't tell us more. What they do is they create a consensus to ensure their privileges. And that's why we don't have many Brahmin cultural suicide bombers. We need them.
I fully agree with you. And in the interest of time, I wanted to talk about, in another context, the cultural suicide of Brahmins. And it's funny that you mentioned that because we didn't talk about it. Vijay Prashad wrote this wonderful book where he talked about what Indian Americans should aspire to in the United States, where they were being held up as a model minority against other people who were not in the least anywhere close to being as pampered and well-fed as they were growing up before migrating, like African Americans especially, and suggested that the best thing they could do is commit model minority suicide. It's a dark but interesting note to end on, which, look, we're discomfited, we're made uncomfortable, we are enthralled, and just absolutely delighted to have you. I could have listened to each of you all night, but we don't have all night because you will have some time to sign books, and we'd like to ask the audience to participate in this panel by asking us questions. Thank you, Ram. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Suraj. Thank you, Menaka.
Thank you.
And the floor is now open. There's a mic. There's a mic that's going around. This has been a strident but respectful conversation, so may I ask that if you have a strident question, keep it respectful. Yes? We'll take a couple of different questions and answer them.
This is
Oh yeah, and could you also, Suraj was just saying, can you identify yourself? Just tell us who you are. And,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm Mahesh Natarajan, and this is specifically to Grace with regard to the trans bill that came up. I just wanted to ask you to talk about how intersex people got left out of the bill or like got confused with the trans people in that bill, and also about how abuse of trans people is treated in this bill. Those two I thought you could
See,
Thank you. Grace, what we'll do is we'll take a couple of questions and then we'll go around so that everybody has a chance to. Yeah. Yes, if you have a question to a specific panelist, then mention your.
Hi, yeah, sorry. My name is Abhineet. I'm a student. My question is for Suraj and Grace. This is from a friend of mine who belongs to a Dalit community, but he is, so I'll just frame the question. He goes on, whether people from lower caste who do not feel any apparent differences from their upper caste peers should choose to avail resources provided for lower caste upliftment. Should they have the obligation to give up? If not, why not?
Thank you. There are some questions up there. There are many hands up there, so I'm not sure how we do this, but maybe we can do this side, one side first, and then get to the other. Sorry, we'll do another round, and then we'll get to this side. Yes.
Hi, I'm Aryan. I'm a student. So I just had a question to all the panelists, actually, so anybody can weigh in. So I heard Suraj talk about reparations. And forgive me if I misunderstood this, but you talked about reservations as one of the means for reparations, and how, it's one thing that should be talked about as one form of giving reparations. It's not just giving 100 rupees, it's also structural change that needs to occur. But you also tell us that, these reservations have told people that they don't need to do more to help these, to help the OBCs, right? Because they've given them seats in a college and that's enough, right? So wouldn't you think in order to remove these caste biases in the future, it would be more conducive to remove any government reservations and instead try to raise awareness among the people so that they themselves, which is the stem of the problem, change instead of forcing them to change through reservations?
One more? Okay, actually, shall we just we'll just use this as one round and oh yeah, of course.
I wondered to what extent does power play a part in keeping the caste system going? To me, it seems, is it true that the caste system is a frozen method of keeping power in the hands of the people who have the power? Because if you take other countries, it can be, there is a give and take. There is I can get power from you, you get power from me. But with the caste system, it becomes far more difficult to do that. And I haven't read your book, but have you dealt with this business of power, how seductive power is? And therefore, I need another to be able to be in power. What would be your reaction to that?
Shall we do this? Shall we just, we've got 4 questions, we could answer them and then we'll come back for the next round, if that's okay? Yeah, so hold your questions, be right back. Want to start with Suraj and then go along to anyone else?
Thank you. I'll try to club these questions. Thank you for incredible comments and questions. Caste is actually, it's a power is very central, right? And being a Foucauldian, it's also a biopower, how you control it, but also how you withdraw the power from other person and make the person powerless, And I think the powerlessness should also be the kind of focus when we talk about this frozen institution called caste. And when we talk about caste, I also would like to show mirror to the dominant caste too, because the narrative of caste is always equated. Similarly with race, it's always the African Americans, but also, we need to talk about the dominant caste and how they use the institutions that they create themselves and then monopolize it for generations. And even now, and that's why, to speak in Malcolm X's context, the democracy that we have, it becomes for Dalits and many other people in the hypocrisy. Because what are we even trying to do? It's just to promote a few handful, and that's why I say even the extension of reservation is not fully implemented. So the idea of reparation and how we think about this is, I think, limiting. It's really squarely putting that just you guys have to fight in this percentage only, and you guys figure out, and the whole discourse is covered under that. And that's why I say we have to go beyond. In addition to reservation, we need to focus on how do we redistribute the resources that we have, and it is not that we do not have, we already have. And I don't think India is a poor country, especially when we have billionaires living in this very country, right? We need to think creatively. Have to have we achieve to the justice more like Rawlsian sense of how do we redistribute this whole mechanism, and it's not only the redistribution of resources to reach at some place, but it is to reach at the point of justice, and that's what Dalit community is also asking for. It is asking for justice that goes with dignity. Both things people cannot afford to give because they are themselves not dignified and themselves unjust, and because they have this monstrous feeling to remove the dignity out of other person and to not talk about justice, this autocratic dominant caste people operate amongst us, who give rise to the representative of an autocrat that operates with us.
Chris, you want would you like to add anything to anything?
This trans bill have that intersex people rights, but it's not clear. So intersex people, they have they want separate kind of rights. So this bill only have some point of that word only, that intersex person, they are including the intersex person, that's it. But the intersex persons have lot of they want a lot of rights, so their demand is totally different. So it's not clear in this bill. And the abuse, this bill have the offenses and punishment chapter. It says when the trans people get the sexual assault or abuse, by other people, that is punishment. It's 2 years, maximum 2 years. So I'm a trans woman. When I get the sexual assault, but that person punishment is minimum 2 years. Sorry, maximum 2 years. But normal people, that women get sexual assault, that minimum 6 years, I think. 7 years, 7 years.
Amazing.
So how?
Yeah.
This is totally. That's why I said this is totally injustice.
Ram, Menaka, you have anything to add to these questions? Of course. Yeah. In the interest of time, I will decide. You shall go.
No, I mean, I just think that, we just have a bouquet of injustice at the moment. It's just overflowing.
Lot to choose from.
And you have lots to choose from. And the bouquet keeps growing.
Spoiled for choice.
Yeah.
Ram.
So, I mean, I just want to respond in a general way because I'm the oldest person in this room. I've also said I'm the most privileged, which is true. On these days, I also spend the most time reading rather than acting or changing, which is what the other three people do, right? Suraj does a combination, and so do I. So I just want to just say a little bit about what are the intellectual and moral resources that we have in 2019 to think critically about different forms of discrimination and challenge it. And we have spent a lot of time praising Ambedkar. And I yield to no one in my praise of Ambedkar. But he was an extraordinary figure who needs to be much more widely appreciated and known. But there is a danger today in the discourse about discrimination that in the old days, we all glorified nationalism and there was only one hero, that was Mahatma Gandhi. And he deserved much of that applause, but many other people got left out. Today, in the radical, subaltern, Dalit, feminist, XYZ movement, there is only one hero, that is Ambedkar. And much of the praise is deserved, of course, but there are many others. And as someone who's tried to study some of them, many of the extraordinary thinkers and reformers of the 19th and 20th century did not write in English. Some did. Some wrote in both languages, like Gandhi and Ambedkar wrote in both, Gujarati and English or Marathi and English. So some of the people I'd urge you to look out for. One was mentioned by Grace, who's Periyar. And absolutely don't listen to a Tamil Brahmin on Periyar. I say this as a Tamil Brahmin. Just the other day, I was on a flight to Coimbatore, and someone met me on the flight, and he said, why have you put Periyar in Makers of Modern India? And obviously he was a Brahmin going to Coimbatore, right? Now, it so turned out that my mother, who I told you I was raised in a relatively self-conscious, self-critical Brahminical home, she hardly reads anything I write. But when she was 80, she read my anthology, Makers of Modern India, and said Periyar is the greatest thinker there. Not just because of caste, because of gender. I mean, he was profoundly sensitive on questions of gender, an early proponent of contraception and so on, the kind of things Gandhi hated to promote, for example. Right. Now, so Periyar is one, whom Grace has mentioned. Then you go a little further south, and there's Narayana Guru of Kerala, who is not enough known in the English language world. There's some literature coming out now, but much more needs to come out. A profoundly original humanistic thinker. His slogan was, one caste, one God, one humanity. All right. Well before Ambedkar. And actually, he opened Gandhi's mind even before him. He's a profoundly important place in the history of modern India, but not known much outside Kerala. Periyar and Narayana Guru. Two reasons why the BJP is not in power in those two states. I don't say this frivolously at all. I don't say this frivolously at all. Right, okay. There is some truth to what I say. Then come to Suraj's state, and he's mentioned Phule and Ambedkar. But there's also the sadly forgotten, though now slowly being rehabilitated, Tarabai Shinde, who in the 1880s wrote a tract called A Comparison of the Rights Between Men and Women, which is a biting satire, translated by Rosalind O'Hanlon, also the great biographer of Phule, with a wonderful introduction. There's Tarabai Shinde, there's Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay from our state. There would be other people, who are forgotten now. There's a very brilliant book. Those of you who are bookish people, reading people, pick up a book called Religion as Social Vision. Do you know this book, Suraj? Well, please read it. Okay. All of us should read it. It's a book written by a brilliant American scholar, Mark Juergensmeyer, who writes on religion now. It's his PhD thesis, published in the early 1980s on the Punjab, about a man called Mangu Ram, who was the Ambedkar of the Punjab of that day. Right. Now, so we have to expand our pantheon of dissenting thinkers. Ambedkar still may be the god, and absolutely, he must shine brightly, but there are these other people whom we can think of, who are, from different parts of India, writing in different languages, different contexts, fighting different battles. Some of those battles are irrelevant to us, some of them speak directly to us. So that's what I'd like to say. I mean, there's a great deal of, if you want to fight, the ruling deities of the ruling party today, there are lots of intellectual and moral resources we can draw upon.
Or would you like to respond in the next round of questions? You can have now. Yeah.
Very short. And you're absolutely right, Ram, right? Like, you need to expand that pantheon. But there's this other moment, right, today, which is you are confronted by a hegemonic, well-organized political movement, right? And what is the response to that? What is the political response to that? I'm not talking about political parties' responses to that. Well, I'm saying, what is our politics to that? One of the great things about the constitutional, right, is that it affords you the luxury of, one, talking of values but being detached. It doesn't necessitate action often, because you can agitate in a court context. But really, is our response today necessarily about expanding our range of thinkers that we consult? Or is it also that what is our political response to this hegemonic defining of us? And that's what is happening, right? We are being defined as we sit here, as we talk about thinkers. We are being defined. And they are not defining us with thinkers.
Defined and confined.
Defined and confined, right? They are not defining or confining us with thinkers, And so that is, to my mind, that is what this is about. I have come here to learn from all of you, but especially from Grace and Suraj, because I want to understand what is our political response to this moment.
What we'll do is, we're seriously out of time. Suraj needs to sign books outside so that some of you can directly engage with him, but really only for about 10 minutes. There were some hands up in the corner there for a while. So at the back somewhere, the mics are there. So may I ask you a favor? Can we just have those questions from there? And can we then have personal discussions outside while you get a signed book, if you wish, at a later stage? Yeah, go ahead.
My question is for Suraj. If caste, as you mentioned, is a man-made human narrative, and for narratives to exist in society, we need majority of the people to actively buy into narratives. Considering that Brahmins were only a minority, how do you think that this Gotra system was established? How did the majority of the people buy into this narrative? And do you think a possible solution to this complex issue could be a creation of a counter-narrative?
Are there other questions? Thank you. Were there any other questions from vintage on that side? There is?
I am Madhu. I'm a student, and I also call myself Dalit. So I'm sorry if I'm asking you what you might have spoken, because I was late. So I have this confusion with the word Dalit, because whenever you type in Dalit or whenever you see in media, you see Dalit murdered, burned, raped. Also, I see this media or some other political parties trying to, program our minds or condition our minds to be always, in a way, reducing our space to think or aim to go, aim to high. So in such situation where this Dalit word is also playing a huge role in conditioning our minds, so I have confusion whether to use it or do we need to find a new identity or word in such a situations like this.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do, with your permission, is Suraj will make a few remarks, then we'll close. Suraj will be signing books outside for about 10 to 15 minutes. BIC needs to close down, have a hard close, as they say, by about 5 minutes past 8. Suraj.
Thank you for your questions. Whatever word you may use, your condition is not changing, right? And we need to focus on that. And of course, we can have multiple identities that can operate. We can have a rainbow kind of carnival of multiple identities who are striving for one common aim. So whatever you feel good, you use it. There's no pressure to use this or that, And again, the second point that you said when you put in Google and, this is algorithmic casteism, right? The algorithms that have been, used and the programmers who mostly sit in cities like Bangalore and all are themselves castes. And that's why, we have not tackled the issue when it comes to technology and, these algorithms vis-a-vis their perpetuation of caste. They have done there in America, but how racism is when you put a black woman and then you see all forms of pornification of a black woman's body. So that could be one of the possible answers. To answer your question, you see, I really appreciate you for raising that. There was always appropriation of novel narratives that came out. For example, the figures like Narayana Guru, Periyar, and the pantheons were put forward by the movements like BAMCEF. Who, if you go to their conventions, BAMCEF, the back is like top, about 30% of the top bar of their posters is covered by the pantheons of the movement, and they belong to various castes, mostly the non-Brahmin caste who contributed to the movement. And I think one of that revival was effectively done by Kanshiram and the likes. So when we connect that part to how do we talk about why do people buy into it, and I think this is because we have a feeling of us also being part of that group. There is an aspirational complex that kind of develops, and today India started off as a project of a Brahminic India. Because your prime minister was Brahmin, the multiple chief ministers were Brahmins, and the cabinet ministers, and for after Nehru, Shastri, Gandhi, and so on, we have this huge hegemonic dominance of Brahmins. Even in current cabinet, we have overwhelming representation of Brahmins. And I think this is a very central thesis. What Periyar also tackles effectively is to identify the people who continue to conjure those relations of power and then manipulate in order to harass other people who can raise questions. And therefore, our enemy has become a mythical enemy. We have to fight against Hindu majoritarianism. Now, if one asks, what does this constitute? Is this a really epistemological category to exist? And then when we break up, this Shoaib Daniel did when the attack, when the in Kashmir, when the people, where he broke according to the caste, and that was like the first affront, where he's actually finding who were actually dying, even under the men in uniform, and that's the kind of question we need to start asking right now, because what we do is when we present a neutral sort of reality, we hide the immense amount of casteness that kind of constitutes that reality. So be it martyrs, be it your generals, be it Rawat or Bakshis, and we have not yet attained to the progress, and therefore confining Ambedkar only to the maker of constitution is actually dwarfing his many other multiple personalities, and also trying to tell the Dalits that this is the only avenue you have that you need to focus on. my argument is we need to find out, in addition to constitution, how do we creatively use constitution, but also how can we go a step further? Because there is a sense of urgency that has been, continuing into this lifestyle that, Dalits are always looked at certain ways, and therefore today the representation of Dalits, for example, I studied migration, I studied various cultures, but I'm invited to talk only about Dalit issues. But for example, Ram or Menaka or other people from other castes will not be invited to talk only, they are never called to talk about, okay, tell me what does it mean to be a Brahmin? Ram Guha could, and that's how it is, right? I mean, one is asked to be defensive in his one's defense, and one can propagate the idea of, and so if I say anything about a notion of India, it will be always constructed, oh man, this again Dalit talks about. There is no essential rationality to my thinking that he or she could also contribute to a new discourse. And that's why what we see is, in the media and other spaces, there is a total underrepresentation. The first 3 cabinets of Nehru's, there was no single Adivasi sitting in the cabinet. That's the kind of project we had defined into our, and then, Shastri continues, Indira Gandhi continues, there is one cabinet minister somewhere in the late 60s or early 70s, and then again, it falls down. This is the kind of graphic as well as numerical reality we need to understand, and then we can then talk about how do we really face the question of caste in 21st century. Thank you.
Suraj, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Suraj. Thank you, Suraj. On a concluding note, when you want to take a break from speaking about Dalit issues, you always have a place in my photo novellas as a loan shark. Thank you very much, Ram. Thank you, Grace. Thank you very much, Menaka. Thank you for coming. Suraj will be signing books outside for about 10 minutes, so get yours.